Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. You're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and as always, I'm your host, Reed Coverdale, and we've got the gang back together. We've got Mike on the show. How's it going, Mike?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing good. We got Charles on the show, checking in from South Carolina. How's it in South Carolina, Charles?
Oh, doing pretty well. Just trying to bear the heat and the humidity down here and stay cool.
There you go. Good luck. And then we got Dave way down in Florida, even hotter. How's it going down there, Dave?
A lot like what Charles is dealing with, but turn up the oven a little bit, that's all.
All right, so today we're going to talk about a few issues. The first one we're going to talk about is the rioting, the protesting, and what realistic police reform looks like. So there's just been this shooting again and a bunch of rioting in Wisconsin. And then there was an altercation with a 17-year-old kid, and 3 people got shot, 2 of them got killed, and more businesses burned and everything. For me, I went to a protest myself a couple months ago, and I sympathize with a lot of the reforms these people want. I think the police are too big. They've got too much gear. They're protected too much. There's all sorts of things like we should get rid of qualified immunity, no-knock raids, civil asset forfeiture. I also think it has to do with getting rid of a lot of these dumb laws related to drug use. If we could remove those, we wouldn't have nearly as many infractions and run-ins between civilians and police. But the rioting and protesting as a whole, I'm kind of losing any sympathy toward them. I mean, specifically, they swarmed Rand Paul the other day, and were screaming at him, say her name, referencing Breonna Taylor. And he's the guy who wrote the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. And he's got the best record in the Senate on criminal justice reform. And that's really reflective of my experience when I went to that rally a couple months ago. I walked around and I was talking to people and I was asking them, what does change look like? You guys are all shouting, no justice, no peace. What does justice mean to you? And no one really had any concrete answers. So I think they need to get out and vote for people who want to actually change the system. And a lot of these people, I think, are going to vote for Joe Biden or not vote. And they're out there protesting. So, when it comes down to it, it's good to protest and everything, but you have to actually put your money where your mouth is and vote. And I pretty much agree with the libertarian position on police reform. We spend nationally $100 billion a year on the police force, and it's basically become an extra arm of the military. So I think we need to drastically reform how it's funded. We need to take away all these special safeties that police officers have, and the police need to be there to protect the people, not look at them as enemies. And I think that's kind of how we train the police force these days. So, Mike, what's your take on everything that's going on? What do you think?
Boy, I find it really ironic how they're going after Rand Paul, who is probably, like you said, the most criminal justice, senator that we have right now. It's a lot like going after Abe Lincoln because of slavery. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so,
Right.
just thinking about the rioting and protesting in general, I watched a podcast that Michael Malice and David Smith, I think, were doing. They talked about protesting, and they're like, it kind of wastes the time. It doesn't really solve any problems. It just, if you're lucky, you hold up a sign and you end up on the news, and it says something that, but I think it's kind of a waste of energy. Maybe we should just focus on trying to solve problems and trying to, point out that signs with tokens, it doesn't really solve any problem.
Yeah. So what would the correct reforms to the police look like in your mind?
I mean, the ones that have been floated, no knock raids, ending the war on drugs, you know, I think just really rethinking what the government and the police force is, rather than policing behavior all the time, we should just be focusing on dealing with crime, upholding the law, not policing neighborhoods and trying to go after people who are doing minimal infractions, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your take, Charles? What do you think about all this?
Well, overall, Reed, I think you're kind of on to something there when you said that you talked to a few folks and you couldn't really get a concrete answer on, okay, what does justice mean to you? Something that I have come to realize. For some people, sure, they want reforms like what you were just talking about, what Mike was just talking about. They want the qualified immunity to end, right? They don't want the police to have all this military style gear, right? They think we're getting a little too bloated. Some people actually have a narrative. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, I've come to at least my own conclusion it's never going to be enough. They're unsatisfied with the country. They have a strong dislike for law enforcement in general, and until there is no police, they're not going to be happy. One thing I hate to say that we've found with a lot of the things that have come out that have caused a lot of these protests and riots is that we're not getting the full story early on, like in George Floyd's case, for example, and then details come out when the body cams get released after the fact that show, okay, he wasn't just yelling, I can't breathe the time the knee was on his neck. He was actually yelling it the entire time they were trying to just get him in the car and he was kicking the door back open. So if someone was yelling that at me for 5 minutes straight, if I were in that scenario, would I think he's just trying to feed me a line to get me off of him because he wants to try to fight me again? Or would I really believe he's actually having serious trouble? It's the boy who cried wolf. He yelled it for 5 minutes when there was no knee on his neck, and yet it was blown into this. No, they just held him down and choked him out with a knee on the back of his neck and killed him, right? So again, the mainstream media is literally fueling us towards a civil war here, and unfortunately, I just don't think enough people put themselves in the shoes of a law enforcement officer. The most recent shooting, what is his name? Jacob Blake, right?
Yeah.
You got cops that's drawn guns on you. They're telling you not to move. The guy keeps walking, right? He keeps going towards his car, opens up a door, and starting to reach inside, and that's when he got shot. Now, it's happened time and time again. Somebody reaching the door, he could have pulled out a gun. Okay, if I'm a cop, I got a family to go home to that night too. And so this argument that, well, you're the cop, so you should just be willing to die because that's your job. No, I'm not there to just go out and die like a pawn in a chess game. If I'm a cop, I'm there to serve the community. But if someone is not cooperating with me and it looks like they could very well be going into their car, they're not listening to a word that I'm saying, and I don't know what they're about to pull out of that, door compartment, I'm going to have to protect myself. You know what I mean? If I've already had my gun drawn on you telling you not to move and you disobey that, I'm going to do what I think I've got to do to protect myself at that point. And I think that's what most people will do. Quanell X, a huge modern Black Panther leader from Houston, Texas, was very critical of the police once upon a time. He always did the armchair quarterback thing where he said, no, there's a better way. And so they invited him out one day. They said, come on out and we'll send you through some drills. You know how many people he shot that were quote unquote innocent, that were reaching in their pockets and didn't actually pull out a weapon, but he thought that's what they were going for because they would not listen to him when he told them to stop? He had more than one. So that shows you right there. You could sit around and tell these police what they should be doing. Once you're in that situation, it's a whole nother animal. Okay, and too many people don't want to realize that. Another problem is that they're acting like we should not be, in other words, you don't have to listen to the police. You see what I'm saying? This guy disobeyed the police's orders. They told him to stop. He didn't stop. And so because of these protests, they're sending a message. You shouldn't have to listen to any law enforcement. If you don't want to stop for the cop, he should just stand back and let you do you. You know, no, you've got to have some law and order. If you don't want to get shot when you're being confronted with the police, don't make anything that could be considered an act of aggression. Don't go out of your way to just disobey what the cop's asking you to do. You know, but what's going on overall in the country right now, man? In my opinion, these riots and these protests, it's going to get nothing but more tension between races, more tension between right and left, and eventually, if it doesn't stop, it's going to end up in a civil war. Even if we get people to vote, the mainstream, there's going to have to be some reform to the mainstream media, because the way they push this, too many people watch them, too many people listen to them, and they're just literally tearing us apart at the seams, in my opinion.
So, Dave, I saw you tweet yesterday, I think, that this is going to result in more authoritarianism, which is the opposite of what the protests are going to be. So just give us your take on everything that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Charles hit on something really important when you were making your introduction about, what do these people want, right? You're walking around and you ask a question and nobody has an answer for you, right? I've seen other reporters do this. I've seen indie media go down there, and that's a dangerous thing to go down there. I wouldn't do it. But I understand why you'd want to do it, to try to get to the bottom of this. Rand Paul said something. He kind of tipped his hat a little bit when he said that I think these are paid protesters. These are anarchists that are coming in from out of town. So you're operating over here on this plane. You're talking about police reforms. You're talking about no-knock raids. You're actually talking about a way to reform the system. By the way, a common sense way to reform the system. You're not talking about defunding the police. You're not talking about, turning the police into social workers, because I think that's ridiculous. So, I also tweeted out that if people would do what they're supposed to do when the police tell you to do something, rather than continue doing what they shouldn't be doing. This isn't difficult. This is actually really simple. Every single instance where somebody's gotten shot, I don't care if they're black, they're white, they're polka dot, okay? If they were just listening to what the cops said to do, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. And you guys have done a good job. Charles did a good job at all of this recent news. People are going to want a strongman if this continues. And that strongman right now is Donald Trump. I mean, he's obviously and it's, let me put it this way. It's not as if Donald Trump wouldn't be way out of bounds to say, you know what, we've got to send feds in because local police can't handle this, or this is something that's completely outside the purview of what normally takes place, where you've got people who are getting paid to go in and agitate, and then you've got the media. CNN, I don't know if, Charles, if you saw this headline, CNN said, fiery but mostly peaceful protest.
Yeah.
So you talk about the mainstream media out of control crazy, okay? Last time I checked, peaceful protests weren't necessarily fiery, okay? And again, this goes to something that's completely, I mean, Reed, I admire you because you're talking nuts and bolts, and gee, it'd be nice if we could make people into libertarians and understand that freedom is a good thing, and that you own yourself and you go out there and earn a living, keep more of your take-home pay, have all of these conversations about policy. Charles hit on this. I'm going to hit on it hard. These people do not care about policy. No. They do not care. So they're on the ground agitating, and so the only way to stop them from doing that is to bring in force. Or if there is no force, there is a libertarian principle here. It's the Second Amendment, and if the police aren't going to protect you, you're going to need to protect yourselves. And in these areas, and again, I guess I'm a federalist. I mean, if these states want to do this kind of stuff and they believe that, hey, our state needs to be chaotic and crazy and disorganized and cities need to just burn down, those states are making these decisions. The voters can vote and maybe they'll have a voice, but a lot of these very blue states don't seem like they want to listen. They are saying they don't want the feds to come in, which they have a right to do that. It's constitutional to say no. Is it smart to say no? It depends what kind of world you want to live in. All I know is if I were in one of these states, I'd be looking to move quickly. I would be taking my family, especially if I were close to one of these, urban places where now they're starting to move out into the suburbs, for crying out loud. I heard of a situation where they were going around and, basically accosting people at restaurants and, yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs, and people are just trying to enjoy a little, time away from the chaos, and the chaos is brought to them. So, Reed, the bottom line here is, I don't know if anyone's listening. No one's listening to policy. This is why Joe Biden is in this thing to begin with, because nobody's listening to policy. And if you say, hey, have you ever heard of Joe Jorgensen? They go, what? Who? It's like a different world that you would think to yourself, well, people must be kind of craving something else. They're not craving anything. They don't seem to care. They seem to have, decided that this is what they're going to do. Then you have this element where it's an outside force. And I'd like to know who's behind this. I have some thoughts about who might be behind it, but that would be the Pulitzer Prize if the news media wanted to actually do their job.
Yeah. You were talking about people moving out of the city, and the housing market is actually booming right now because of that particular scenario. Everyone's moving out of the city into the country. And Trump is talking about the booming housing market, and he's talking about the, booming stock market and all these other things, trying to prove that the economy really isn't burning in the dumpster right now. But looks like we lost Mike for some reason. Oh, there he is. But I wanted to talk about that next. The economy is obviously trash to anyone who's paying attention, and it seems like the Republicans are trying to convince us that it's not, and the Democrats are trying to convince us that it's all Trump's fault. But I think regardless of who wins the presidency, including if it were Joe Jorgensen, I think we're in for a very rough road ahead economically, just because of everything we've done this year and the policies we've had for the last 30 or 40 years, where we've gutted the middle class with all these low interest rates and these government-backed loans that people have just spent money they don't have, and they don't own any of their possessions. They're just without a paycheck for a couple weeks, they're sunk. I see a very serious recession or even a depression on the horizon. So, Mike, what do you think about that? Do you see the same scenario, or?
Well, I listen to Peter Schiff a lot, and not just to name drop him, but he's been very vocal about what's been going on with the economy for a very long time. And, fact is, Donald Trump inherited the same economy that Barack Obama had, and because of the tax cuts, we put a fresh look on the economy. Some numbers improved, but it was pretty much stagnant. We didn't really grow, and with COVID-19 happening, everything literally just hit a wall. So I wouldn't call this the greatest economy in the history of the world. I think it's not great. We're moving in a wrong. You know, if all we do is borrow money to maintain the status quo, we're not actually growing. We're kind of moving backwards. It just takes longer for things to hit us. And now we're just printing money like crazy because the economy shut down and people want to have money to pay their bills. But at some point we're going to have to start getting back to work to put our lives back in order, and that's what needs to happen. And that's going to be painful for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
it'll come.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, this idea that we can just, if we printed off enough money to give it to everybody, first of all, paper money is useless at face value. It's supposed to represent something. It's supposed to represent work or value or something. So if we just printed it all off and gave it to everyone, it wouldn't help us. What do you think, Charles? What does the immediate future for the United States economy look like in your eyes?
I'm with you guys. I don't think it's going to be a pretty one. Even if we were to start trying to make the right decisions, it's going to be hard. Honestly speaking, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed internally that our government has mishandled, mismanaged, and they've screwed up. Now, if we were to pull out of the wars and just reallocate that money, that might help with some. Unfortunately, to truly get things fixed, you're probably going to wind up having to spend more if we did the things like we're talking about with real education reform. Now, possibly, if you cut certain things out, you could reallocate those funds as well. But at the end of the day, they've trashed our middle class. They've trashed our economy. They've got us involved into all the wars. And as far as this being the greatest economy in the history of the world, I don't see how you can make that comparison when you go back and look at what was going on in the 1950s and 60s, in my opinion, because during the 50s and the 60s, we actually had an economy where people could afford things. Okay. We actually had an economy where the man could go to work and the wife didn't have to. Right. So, and I'm not necessarily saying that we should have the stay-at-home wives. So don't get me wrong. What I'm getting at is you had a situation where only one person in the household had to have a job in some cases, and they were able to not only pay the bills, get food, buy a car for the family, but have kids. And back in those days, they didn't just have one or two kids. I've mentioned my family on my mom's side, for example. My great-grandparents had about, 5 or 6 kids? And guess what? No welfare involved either. No welfare, okay? Today, you couldn't have 5 or 6 kids and not be making big money and probably not need some kind of government assistance. Right. So how can you say this is the greatest economy in the history of the world when people are having this sort of a financial issue at the grassroots level in the blue-collar community, okay? Some people can't afford 1 or 2 kids. And without having to get, food stamps or whatever. Okay. So there's just no factual evidence to back up this is the greatest economy in the history of the world. And the reason why is because, in my opinion, we keep spending way too much into wars, not keeping our nose in our own business because we want to be the police of the world and try to control what the rest of the world does. Okay. We spend money on that. We spend money like we talked about in the little previous segment there, where we're just bloating police departments up. Too much money is being spent on the wrong things. Our education system that we pump so much money into, and yet we're 27th in the world. And as we discussed, a big part of that is because, number one, they want to tamper with tried and true methods, and they come up with something like Common Core. Okay. So you get that. Then you get, you've got to go get the 4-year degree so you can have a job and make a career. Then you go to the college, you get the 4-year degree in philosophy or some arts and crafts type deal. You come out, you know exactly what the Greeks did, and you know how the human mind works. And guess what? You're never going to become the psychiatrist. You're going to wind up probably 9 times out of 10 making somewhere around $12, $13 an hour, potentially, probably working at a Lowe's or whatever. It doesn't pay for itself. It doesn't pay for itself. If you can land that doctor's job, or if you can become a lawyer or whatever, that's wonderful. But that's not what everyone who takes the class is going to be able to come right out into the workforce and find a job in. There's not enough of them because society doesn't demand enough of them. But what society does demand are people who can program the machines you see around us, people who can work, and weld and work on cars and things like that. Trade jobs. It's always going to be there. Okay. So you can find a career and you can make good money. I know they want to make computer driven 18 wheelers, which absolutely scare me to death. I would not want to be driving down the road next to one of those things. But hey, CDL license, you can become a truck driver. You can make money, but our education system doesn't promote this to people, right? And so again, we need to fix these things, but until we get societal reform and we start educating people, because I'll tie what we're talking about right now to the previous segment in a way. We don't have people who understand economy. We don't have people who understand law and order. Okay, we have a generation, unfortunately, coming up into the world that have been spoiled. They've been grown up to be brats. They don't understand the value of hard work. That's why they don't want to try to go get the job where you're going to be sweating for 8 hours a day. That's why they thought when the education system told them, no, if you just do this, you'll have this job. And it sounded so great. Why should I go bust my butt for 8, 12 hours a day, right? So you've got this entitled society that's coming into fruition right now because the older generations are starting to die out, okay, especially with the age of living going down. So they don't have an appreciation for law and order. They don't think they have to listen to anyone. They grew up pretty much because of movies, music, and everything and pop culture with a rebellious attitude, thinking I don't have to listen to the societal norms. I'll do what I want to do anyway. I don't have to go out and make a hard living to have some money. I'll just vote for Democrats who are going to pay off all of my student debt, who are going to give me a universal basic income, who are going to provide all my health care needs for me, and I can continue working at Burger King and I'll never have another problem, right? I'm just afraid that's what we've got going on. So we've got to fix this mentality. We've got to start educating people better, and especially with the generation that's going to come after this one. We've got to make that change. We've got to start teaching people the value of hard work. But the economy, at least for the next few years, is going to be absolutely horrible because Democrats and Republicans, there's no other way to put it, they've made an absolute mess with this economy.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of law and order related to economics, I made a joke on Twitter that if we are going to be burning buildings down, we should go after the Federal Reserve building. And luckily, this video is not going to be monetized, so I don't have to worry about saying that. But so, Dave, I think this is actually what kind of drew you away from the Green Party in a way. It was one of the things, just the idea that we can print money forever. We can just, I remember watching some of your videos. You said eventually you have to give someone the fishing pole and say, okay, you're on your own. So what do you think about the economy and moving forward, what it's going to look like and how people are going to have to deal with it?
Yeah, well, when Charles was talking, I really wanted to try to interrupt him and start yelling at him, but I refrained because he was saying all of these crazy right-wing talking points, and at that point I was about ready to walk out of the room, but I decided to stay in, and I want to make some points here. I want to talk about Lyndon Baines Johnson. I want to talk about the Tea Party, and I challenge Reed Coverdale to go find somebody from the Tea Party to have him on. I'd like to find anybody from the Tea Party who still exists. Remember those guys? hey, you know, the national debt, it's out of control. What are we going to do? We need to stop. Well, Donald Trump gets elected president, and all of a sudden the Tea Party, it goes away. And I'm thinking to myself, weird, because Donald Trump is not a fiscally conservative president. In fact, he'll write a blank check to the U.S. military any day of the week. And, you got people that want to trim the budget like 10%. No, can't do that. So that is a big problem. But I have a third point here, and that's relating back to Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, he decided to do this thing where he was going to entice minority voters and have them in the pockets of Democrats for the rest of the political existence of this country. I don't even know if that's a term, but I made it up. And he succeeded. He succeeded wildly. All right. It's called the Great Society, and then pushing forward, that Great Society, we find out, ain't so great. So for about a half a century now, we have been subsidizing sloth. That's the best word I could come up with. I think Charles said it very eloquently, but essentially, it doesn't pay to go to work. It pays to stay home. And as someone wisely said to me one time, he said, well, why the heck would you go to work if you're going to make money just sitting at home? You'd be really stupid, right? And that's kind of the mentality. They look at you, you're out there driving a truck, Michael, or Charles, you're working your ass off. Reed, you're driving a truck. You guys are all blue collar. I get to stay home and make videos. I'm the only white collar worker here, a t-shirt collar worker. So it's kind of like, but I did other things prior to this. I worked at a Home Depot. I've done a lot of jobs where, you put in 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. I worked in a call center at one time, which was crazy bad work. I don't advise you do that, but I did it because I made money and I was willing to do it to support my family. But that's the thing. Nobody's willing to do it because the system, and I hate to use this word because it's been overused, but the system has kind of been rigged. It's been rigged in a way where if you start talking common sense, and you start saying things like, well, you should really have a strong work ethic. You should think about the consequences of your behavior. All these things. And people get triggered now. They're on Twitter. They're like, what did you just say to me, boomer? What did you say to me? And it's like, whoa, we all grew up. Most of us grew up, people my age and older. I mean, we built the country. Not me personally, but I know people that built this country. And when you hear that, it's not a cliche. Nobody's willing to do any building anymore. Everybody wants to let someone else do the building. Something changed in our lexicon in the last, 20 years. George W. Bush used to always say, well, these are jobs that some people just aren't willing to do, meaning that poor immigrants have to come here and do the work that Americans used to do. And so that all of a sudden cheapens one form of work, makes it, I grew up where I was told all work is dignified. All work is good. I don't look at you because you pick fruit and say, oh, what a loser, they pick fruit. No, that's hard work. Good for you. You're doing something that needs to be done. I don't eat unless you go pick the fruit. So to me, that makes sense to lift that up. But again, we're not teaching to trades. We're not teaching to vocations. This whole education system is bankrupt. We found out during our little pandemic here that the education system can be turned off instantly, and you can learn from home, you can homeschool, you can do a number of different things. Private schools, by the way, private schools here in Florida, been open for 2 weeks. I have a 6-year-old who's attending private school, and he's doing great. And that's all I could say. There's a way around all of this stuff. But as far as the economy moving forward, I mean, we're in a depression. we're in a depression, and I don't know how you're just going to dig your way out of a depression of this size. You keep printing money, and again, the value of the money. We understand. Some of us understand economics, and we've seen never-ending inflation. I mean, I said this like 30 years ago, just as somebody who didn't know anything, and I still don't know that much. But I said, why do the price of things always go up? They never go down. Like there's always like a car was at one time in my life, you could buy a brand new car for like $6,000-$7,000. Now it's like 24,000. Why doesn't that price ever level off and say, you know what? The money is always going to be worth this much. There's a reason why it keeps costing more, and people don't get it. I mean, you can't rent a cheap little apartment anymore anywhere without taking your entire paycheck and throwing it at that. And by the way, you've got nothing for it. You're paying a landlord. And so, you know, again, I don't know where the Tea Party went, Reed, but I think that's a challenge. I think you need to go find a Tea Partier who still exists right now and have them on your next broadcast. And I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, I think they're mostly libertarians now. I think they've kind of given up on the Tea Party organization. Yeah, I mean, it's funny what you said about boomer there, because people on Twitter have called me a boomer, even though I'm 26, just because of my mentality. You know, it's like, it just shows how removed we are. So going forward with this economic crisis, I wanted to talk about what we think the government should do. So when this first hit, I was sympathetic toward the idea that Justin Amash and Tulsi Gabbard and I think Mitt Romney and a couple other people had that, you know, we should just give direct cash relief to the people to get through this. And in the beginning, that made sense, you know, especially if we could reallocate the resources, because we were talking about pulling out of Afghanistan. If we could have brought some troops home and cut some stuff here and there and reallocated it to do a couple direct transfers, I was on board with that. But then we saw the CARES Act and the HEROES Act and, you know, all these bailouts and stimulus packages that are coming down the pipe. And the government is obviously so incapable of being responsible and doing what it says it's going to do. And I'm going to get a little dark here, but I think we're getting to the point where the idea of digging ourselves out of this hole is actually just fantasy. I mean, because we're talking, you know, around $27 trillion in debt, and we're still headed in the wrong direction with all of our policies. And if we turned our policies around, if we raised interest rates through the roof, if we raised taxes through the roof and cut spending, you know, by 90%, there would be a revolution, because people would not want to pay those taxes. I mean, I think we're spending, we should be taxing 60 cents on the dollar for the amount of spending we're doing this year. Can you imagine if they started telling you that we're going to tax you 60 cents on the dollar? And that's just for this year. So if we're going to dig ourselves out of this debt, you know, I don't think it's going to happen. So I think the natural occurrence is going to be default, and then losing the world reserve currency status and just seeing, you know, our elevated lifestyle plummet. So I think what we're living through right now, we think it's bad. I think it's going to get way worse. And honestly, at this point, I think the government should just get out of the way, because they've done nothing but make it worse. You know, if they would just completely stop doing everything they're doing right now, it would save us a little bit of heartache going forward. So, Mike, what do you think? I know you're kind of the same school I am, but
yeah. Well, you know, the funny thing is, okay, the dot-com bubble burst, so we slash interest rates down to 1%, and then it creates a housing bubble, and then, you know, we slash interest rates down to 0 and start these quantitative programs, and then, you know, suddenly, you know, every time we do this, we're just kicking the can down the road, and then suddenly, oh look, there's the can again, and everything just falls apart, and we got to find our way to print money just to get back to staying even. At some point, you know, you got to pay this money back, right? Or not. I don't know. You know, one of these funny things where it's like, okay, well, Peter Schiff would say that inflation is the more expensive kind of default, where rather than saying, look, hey, sorry, Chapter 11, I can't pay my bills, we're going to have to find a way to restructure, we're just going to say, well, I'll pay you all your money back, but it's not going to be worth anything.
Right.
It's almost like a trade-off like that. And, if all we're doing is creating inflation, I think back to early 1970s when we came up with this monetary system, we were just going to create this, rather than using a gold standard, we're going to say, have the dollar be as good as gold. And that's how this whole, backstop with the American dollar, petrodollar, that all came into existence because, Saudi Arabia makes us trade oil in dollars. But how long can we continue this? We already know that Russia and China are working behind the scenes to try to create something to replace the American dollar. It's only going to be a matter of time, and we seem to be printing our way into oblivion. And, who knows what's going to happen? Someday we might have a dollar crisis, and things might be getting super expensive, like Weimar Germany or, Zimbabwe, or,
Yeah. Venezuela. Yeah.
Venezuela, yeah. So there's plenty of an example in recent history that show dire consequences to all the money, but see what happens.
Yeah, Charles, when I talk to a lot of progressives, they think that we can somehow just get away with printing forever, that the petrodollar is going to hold the dollar up as the world reserve currency forever, and it's just completely bomb-proof, and it's absolutely ridiculous to think that it could fall apart when, as Mike just pointed out, it's happened in a lot of other countries, and that world reserve currency status is unstable at best. So what do you think is going to happen going forward? And is there anything the government can or should do to, help us get through that or get around it? Or should they just get out of the way because they've just created the problem themselves?
Well, I'll just start with this. As far as the getting out of the way, absolutely. Democrats and Republicans need to exit stage left ASAP. They need to be gone. They're the ones that's created the problem. Okay? I hit on the Democrats the last time and what they've done to hurt society, and as a result, it's created a lot of folks who are dependent upon the government. Well, what have the Republicans done wrong? What did they do that's made things worse? The issue, unfortunately, with just cutting all the taxes, especially for corporations and whatnot, completely across the board, was when there was no strings attached to getting these tax cuts. So they were able to rake in more money through tax cuts, while also still through free trade deals, outsource their jobs. Okay, so you just completely gutted some source of income for the country while allowing jobs to go bye-bye, which then hurt the middle class. And because we've lost manufacturing in this country the way that we had once upon a time, and the majority of the jobs are not ones where people make a good income at this point, and they're not getting training for a lot of the manufacturing jobs that are coming back because of what we just discussed. There's nothing in the country that can pay for itself, if that makes any sense, right? So people don't have enough money to go out and just spend and splurge like we once did. We don't have the money to be quite as much of a consumer society as we once were. And instead, what the government is taking tax dollars and spending it on is war, which how does war pay for itself? The only way you could argue war is going to pay for itself is if you just go in, wreck everything, collect what's left over, and say, it's mine. So you seize all the oil fields, which we believe might have been the original intent, right? You seize all the minerals and lithium and whatnot that's in Afghanistan right now. If you were actually seizing all that, there might actually be some way to say, okay, the war paid for itself. But one, that's kind of wrong. So that's why we're not going to do that, right? we didn't seize all the oil fields. We haven't seized the mineral rights. So in actuality, we've just gone over, we've made a mess, and we didn't get anything to show for it. And the reason we keep finding more and more conflict is because we've got so many DoD contractors who have manufacturing companies who are not making televisions and microwaves and cell phones. Instead, they're making things to supply to the military. So see, that's what a lot of the current manufacturing that's still in the country is supplying things for. They're not supplying things in a way for you and me. The stuff we buy is still coming from Mexico, China, Japan, Vietnam. What the current manufacturing in the United States has got a problem with is they're making things that are meant for war. They're making tanks, they're making helicopters, they're making Humvees, they're making airplanes, they're making the new uniforms, the new gear, the new guns. That's what the manufacturing has shifted towards, and there's nothing in there for you and me. This system does not pay for itself, okay? And it's just running debt farther and farther and farther up. As far as what the government should do going forward, they've got to fix that problem first and foremost. If you don't fix getting out of all the wars and spending that money back here at home, this system has no chance of ever. It's like you said, when you mentioned you're going to get dark, right? You can't dig yourself out of this depression with the way things are starting. You could cut taxes all day long. You can lower interest rates all day long. This financially makes no sense. You're not doing anything to build middle class back up. You're only funding more conflict, more war. People can buy less. They live less periods of time. We're spending more money on conflict. So they've got to fit, whether it be Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, because I pretty much know it's not going to be Democrats and Republicans. You've got to shift manufacturers to start making things here at home. And we've got to pull all of our funding out of Syria, out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq. Let's start minding our own business again, right? If we need to still have some military doing something, here's an idea. We hear all the Republicans complaining about the problem on the southern border. Maybe we need to use our actual military to guard our actual country. Okay, just a thought there, right? But at the end of the day, if you mentioned, Reed, the taxes, right? If we were to raise a bunch of taxes. So here's going to be my proposal. If we've got to start coming up with some form of income to start repaying some of this debt we've accumulated back, the very first thing that should happen is that all people who've held public office should have their pensions zapped.
Yep.
Because as a result of the mess they've made, how many blue-collar people lost their pensions? Companies just took pensions away from people, right? So we've already felt what that feels like. You made the mess. Let's get rid of yours. And we'll take all the money that would have went to your old raggedy ass, and we'll use it to start paying back some of this debt. You know, the next thing that should happen? The very next thing that should happen is that all the people who are in politics right now, maybe they should take a pay cut. Maybe what they make right now should be slashed a little bit, because when you go into politics, you're supposed to be a servant of the people. Well, we're living pretty humble right about now, I would say. Okay. So since we've taken pay cuts, we've taken worse working conditions because of the mess you made, you need to share in that. And we'll take the money that we take away from you, and we'll use some of that to pay back some of this debt. So before anything hits the people who have already been impacted by the mess politicians have made, they should take the brunt of it in the first place. Now, of course, getting them to do that is going to be like, you know, getting the Klansmen to go around and just kiss the feet of minorities, right? It's never going to happen. These politicians are not going to just give up all the power that they've got. So that's why we've got to start voting Democrats and Republicans out of office and actually put some people in charge who are trying to be servants of the people and are not bought and paid for by DOD, Wall Street, and things of that nature. and they may actually put some of these things in place so that politics isn't a financial motivator anymore. You know what I mean? Harry Truman said it best. You can either be honest in politics or you can make money, but you can't do both. And considering how many people are in politics right now that are only supposed to be making what, maybe $100,000 to $200,000 a year, and yet since they've been in politics, they became millionaires. I think I ran the numbers one time. Based off Nancy Pelosi's salary, she would have to work hundreds of years and save every penny to have the amount of money that she's got right now.
Yeah.
So, again, without doubt, Democrats and Republicans need to just get out of the way, and we've got to fix this system if we're ever going to dig ourselves out of a depression. If we don't get this change and get it soon, we're going to collapse. There's just no other option. We've got too much civil unrest in the streets. We've got an economic crisis, and this whole country is going to implode if we don't make a change and make it quick.
Yeah. So, Dave, I got to put a little curve on the same question, but you were involved with the Green Party, and the Green Party wants a Green New Deal, and they want all these expanded social programs where in reality we're going to have to be doing pretty much the exact opposite of a lot of those things coming down the pipe here to just stay alive. I mean, we're going to have cheap energy. We're going to have fewer social programs. So how do you see the people reacting to that who are just living on, they're not living on planet Earth? And what do you see happening in the economy going forward? I mean, what should the government do? What is the government going to be able to do? How are people going to react? And, what does it look like in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we should all, look at the world through Twitter. I would just caution everybody to maybe dial Twitter back a little bit, because when you go on Twitter, you get things like, well, yeah, of course we need a Green New Deal because we have no money. Okay, of course we need to abolish the police because we have violence in the inner cities. And so, again, you've got that up is down Orwell thing going on, peace is violence and all this stuff. So the reactions are going to be brutal, but you have to compare it to, say, ripping a Band-Aid off, and you got all the hair that comes along with it when you rip the Band-Aid off. It's going to be insane, the reactions. I mean, even if you tell somebody, hey, why don't you go out and get a job, they freak out on you. They're like, what? You want me to work? So, all right, sure, I'll go to work. Just you have to pay me at least $15 an hour. I have no skills whatsoever, but yeah, give me $15 an hour. To your point, Reed, about what can be done. And I was thinking when Charles was talking, I was going to interrupt Charles again, but I refrained from doing that. The 10th Amendment, I think, could be our last hope. I've been hearing some talk, and you want to talk about dark talk. I've been hearing about states that might not want to be part of the United States of America anymore. I think we should just rename it at this point as the States of America. The U has no purpose at this point. But there are states that might want to go out on their own. And I'm thinking we've got 50 independent laboratories where you've got your own, military, you've got your own militias, you've got your own highway systems, you've got your governors who will act like the president of your little country, whether it's Idaho or Florida. And let the 10th Amendment go to work. Let the power go right back to the states. Have Washington, D.C. Shut down. We don't need Washington, D.C. anymore. Maybe you have a president. Maybe you don't have a president. You certainly don't need a Department of Education anymore, do you? You don't need a Department of Commerce, do you? You might not even need a Department of Defense when you think about it, because if I'm in Florida and my governor doesn't want to send his troops to Afghanistan, he's gonna refrain from that, right? Some other neoliberal, neoconservative place might say, sure, let's send the troops out there because we've got Northrop Grumman here, and they're going to benefit from that. But if you don't have military contractors lining up, you might not want to do that. This is freedom. This is the freedom to choose not to be involved in this anymore and to say, you know what, this is basically in the Constitution. This is when the state and the power gets too big, you have the right to say, you know what, I'm breaking the bond. I am snapping that snake that you saw on the original flags, because it's like join or die. Well, at this point, it might be break up or die, But all of those ginormous, expensive departments up in D.C., Department of Education, bye-bye. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, the states can do it. The local communities can decide what kind of schooling they want. They don't want Common Core, Charles. I can guarantee you that. They want these kids to probably learn something. So that in a nutshell might be the only hope to save what's left of the country, in a sense, that these states would be now competing against each other, and that might actually improve commerce. If you get rid of this gigantic, bloated Washington, D.C., bring the senators back home, or better yet, just get rid of their jobs. Have local representation. You've got your state senators. You got your state representatives. In every state, you've got that form of government already in place. You've got law enforcement. You got your local sheriff, who right now is your most important contact to keep you safe in your state. It's good to get to know who your sheriff is, especially in times like these, because that sheriff has a lot of power, and good, because that's the kind of power I like. It's local. I can contact the sheriff. It's not like he's some, law enforcement person, up in D.C. or something like that. Again, the 10th Amendment here, and the states having the rights to do what they want. If California is so bad, for instance, which it is, it will fail. And then Californians locally will have to decide, do we want this kind of government, or do we want to become Venezuela? They might want to become Venezuela. So the people could say, all right, I'm moving out of this country called California, and I'm going to go to Idaho because they have freedom and they have normal people there who like to work for a living and so forth. And then I think that might be the last chance to save this thing.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings us to our last point. I've said the only way that this country survives or stays together is through libertarian principles, because if Washington, D.C. is going to be our capital, the only thing the federal government should be doing is enforcing the Constitution, more or less. So if a state is violating the Constitution, if they start enslaving people or, breaking down doors and taking their guns away or not allowing them free speech, that's the only time the federal government should really say, hey, knock it off. Other than that, the states should mostly govern themselves. So I wanted the last question to be about which party in power gives a better path forward for the libertarian message. I am of the opinion that the Democrats winning is actually a more accelerationist approach. So if the Democrats win this election with Joe Biden, that proves that they don't need the progressive left that's always screaming, you need us to win. The progressives are putting all their chips on the fact that Trump trounces Biden, because then they'll be like, see, you should have had Bernie. If Biden beats Trump and we end up with a Democratic House and Senate, it'll be terrible, obviously, but that will prove to the to the progressives that they're not needed in the Democratic Party, and then the Republicans are going to implode because they have put everything behind Trump. Trump is the Republican Party. They've thrown all their values aside. There's no family values. There's no fiscal conservatism. It's just Trump. So if he loses, they splinter. And I think you're going to see the rise of alternative parties. Whereas if Trump wins, I don't necessarily see that playing out. So what do you think, Mike? What would lead to a more libertarian government farther down the road, depending on what happens in this election? Aside from Jorgensen winning, obviously, that would be the fastest way. But
Boy, it's hard to say. There's so many factors and things that are involved. I have heard from people who are familiar with other countries that have more than a two-party duopoly, and they find that getting things accomplished at the whole statewide level is a lot more difficult because there's faction and reaching consensus is a lot more difficult. So it's hard for me to say what multi-party would look like in this country. But I don't know how to answer that.
all right, Charles, what do you think? You said that we need to run them both out of town. I obviously agree. Depending on who wins, what do you think how is it gonna affect the future of our political system?
If the Democrats win, you're gonna get 4 more years of getting dumped on. Okay. If the Republicans win, you'll get 4 more years of getting pissed on. Okay. Take your pick. Which one would you rather have? But being serious about the issue, I see your point that this could potentially implode the Republicans. I don't know. I think the Republicans might have to lose a couple of more times because there's too much of a base still clung to Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump loses, the argument's going to be made. It was rigged. It was rigged. It was rigged. He's going to point to the Iowa coin tosses. He's going to point to the mainstream media talking about Joe Biden the way that they have. There'll probably be somebody, Donna Brazil 2.0 giving Joe Biden, all this and that before the debate. There's going to be all these things that are going to come out, and there's going to be a Trump base. This is something I made in a video, a point I made a while back when I was doing some videos with Franco from Frank Analysis. Okay. I said Donald Trump's base is going to have unfinished business. They're going to feel like their man, the real blue-collar president, was cheated. And they're going to feel that the people that they despise so much, the far left, because they lumped Joe Biden in with that crowd, even though we know he's not far left, but whatever, okay? They're going to feel that the people who are just trying to tear America apart at the seams have taken power again, and we've got to come out in droves next time to elect Donald Trump Jr., okay? So they're going to have unfinished business in that regard, and I don't know that you're going to be able to pry them away for a third-party presidency, assuming we don't get Joe Jorgensen this election cycle. I don't know that you're going to detach them in one election from the Republican Party. On the other hand, if Trump wins again, because here's the other thing if you get a Joe Biden presidency, right? You're going to get more of what the Democrats have been doing, which is harming the country, not only economically, but morally. Okay, you're going to have more people dependent upon more government dole. You're still going to get into probably more conflict. Okay, and he's going to cater, not necessarily completely. I don't think he's going to abolish the police, but he'll do all these acts, I guess we'll say, all these different actions or things he's going to do to try to cater to Black Lives Matter and things to keep catering. So people who are not doing things the way they should be in the first place are going to keep thinking this is the way to go. I'll get something superficial. Nothing policy-wise is going to happen. And so it's just going to keep harming the country. I don't think that's going to get us any closer to educating people this isn't the way, and you need to start examining what will work. Honestly, I feel like you're probably going to have a better chance at that if Donald Trump wins the re-election, because people are going to see they're not getting that Joe Biden candidate that's going to just cater to them and talk nice and build the George Floyd Memorial Bridge in the hood of some state, okay, where it's poorly funded, poorly upkept, and right in the middle of the projects. Okay, so you're not going to get that from Donald Trump. It's going to result in one of two things: either people are going to get more violent, and at that point, I think Donald Trump would call the feds in. Whereas we've seen what Democrats in positions of powers will do. They will let someone take over the entire town and tell us that it's going to turn out to be the summer of love. Let's look at Portland, Seattle, all these other places, right? So to me, I feel like what we're going to have is Donald Trump, actually, if we don't get Joe Jorgensen, because that's going to show people, yeah, the left's going to say, see, you can't win without us. But it's going to show all these other folks, these Democrats are not going to win either, okay? And if Republicans keep clinging to Donald Trump and then realize the things that he's claiming he's going to do don't happen in the next 4 years again, because there's already some, I think, who realize Donald Trump's lied to us, okay? Donald Trump hasn't fulfilled a lot of the promises he said he would or hasn't even really tried to, okay? And so if they get 4 more years of it, I feel like then you might get a detachment from the right, and you're probably going to get a detachment from the left, because a lot of them are going to say, okay, look, we wanted Bernie in 16, he got screwed. We wanted Bernie in 20, he got screwed. And then Bernie kept endorsing the problem, and he lost too, so it's time we look for another avenue. To me, I feel like Trump winning again is really getting us on the path to both parties collapsing. Whereas if Joe Biden wins, I feel like if anything collapses, it could be the Republican Party in time, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next election cycle.
All right. Yeah, that makes a logical explanation there. Dave, I remember the last video we did, you said the greatest case for Joe Jorgensen is, unfortunately, if she doesn't win the election and we end up with either Biden or Trump, then, I mean, it's a lose-lose, and things are going to get worse either way. So what's your take? I know you've said that you slightly prefer Trump, but as far as long-term, who is it better to end up with in your mind?
As far as what you were proposing at the beginning, you were saying who's going to usher in the collapse of the system faster. And I would say between these two men, it's about it's a 50-50. It's a toss-up. Who will usher in, the system collapsing faster? One thing, though, I've said about Joe Biden, though, is they will give Joe Biden a blank check to go around the world and do what Joe Biden wants to do. Mm-hmm. Trump, I know some of it is ceremonial, but Trump, it seems to kind of be trying to say, look, I don't want all these troops in Afghanistan anymore. I want to bring a few of them home. Now, it's a drop in the bucket. You and I, we all know the statistics. It's a drop in the bucket. But even Rand Paul the other day said Trump is, he made that speech. I don't love everything that Rand Paul says and does, but he's kind of the anti-war conscience in the Senate. So
right.
I don't think he would put his credibility out there and talk to Donald Trump and say, hey, Trump, you got to do this. I think Trump's doing it on his own. And I think he's had that instinct. Now, to what Charles said, I thought he was going to do a hell of a lot more when it came to, really sort of bringing more and more troops home and so forth. It shows you how deep that deep state is, though. It really, that's my opinion on that. And I'm not giving Trump a pass on it. I'm saying, your first mistake, Donald, was to put, John Bolton in your cabinet, and then you had to go through that whole process of getting rid of him because he wanted to appease neocons to be able to negotiate, because that's what Trump does. He's a businessman. He says, hey, you keep this guy close to you over here and you get this guy over there. Needless to say, the government is so big and intrusive and hard to navigate that Trump didn't know all these people would be spying on him and trying to oust him and throw Russian collusion, hoaxing. I mean, this stuff is just, it's you couldn't write a book, Reed, that was more filled, just chapter after chapter, 4 years. They did not want this guy to be president. They want Biden to be president.
Still there, Dave?
I think the Russians got to him.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Which really...
There he goes.
There you are. You were out for 20 seconds there, yeah.
Wow. All right. I was on a roll too.
Yeah, it was the NSA didn't want people to hear what you were saying because it was too true. You were saying you couldn't have written a book, and then you kind of cut out right after that. I don't know if you remember what you said, but
yeah. Well, I'm just saying. I mean, for 4 years, this has just been one thing that they throw at this guy, and whether you like him or not, our government is so dysfunctional because it's so tribal, and people, it's the same kind of people that go to a rock concert. I hate to use my other channel here, but I'm going to do it. Who know nothing about the band they're going to go see. They know that there's this brand, right? It's Leonard Skinner. They're going to go see Skinner tonight. Do you know that there's one original guy right now in Leonard Skinner? His name is Gary Rosington. I'm sure Charles knows this, right? Yeah. And Gary almost kicked the bucket a couple of times. He's holding on life support, right? People really don't care. They want to go see the brand Leonard Skinner, okay? So there are a lot of people in the political world who kind of meander around and go, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, and this is all they know. And the system, you talk about who's going to make the system collapse. I don't know. I mean, people hold on to these things like they're cherished heirlooms rather than saying, is anybody doing anything that's helping you in your life? And I don't mean like giving you stuff. I mean, are they enabling you to pursue happiness, to go for the things that you're basically given these rights? These rights don't come from government. Technically, they come from God. So are they giving you anything? Are they allowing you to pursue happiness? And the question is neither party. And it's been like this for decades. And it's like this frog in the boiling water scenario where it's warmer, 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 and people just like, hey, all of a sudden we're cooked. How did that happen? Well, you're bailing out car companies, you're bailing out banks. Remember, folks, you heard it here first, America is too big to fail.
All right, well, that's our show. We'll just go around and give everyone like 10 seconds to say their last word. I will have the links to everyone's channels and Twitter pages in the description. So, Mike, what's your last thought before we close out?
So I wanted to take another stab at that question. I think Trump would be better than Biden, but I also think Joe Jorgensen would. I can't bring myself to vote for the lesser of two evils because of that. So that's kind of my final thought.
There you go. All right, Charles, what do you got to say?
Vote for Joe Jorgensen. If you want change in this country, it ain't going to happen from continuing to vote for the problem or just standing around in the street burning mine or yours or someone else's property and yelling you want the change when you don't go to the ballot box and vote for change. So I actually, this time, really vote for a change that we can depend on, and that ain't Obama. It's Joe Jorgensen.
There you go. All right, Dave, what are your thoughts?
It's the problem is trying to reel these people in to something else. Like Reed, you operate on a level, and even some of the progressives who are sincere, who operate on a different level, they talk about issues, they talk about things that are important, whether you agree with Medicare for all, whether you agree with open borders and so forth. They talk about policy, and people are not talking about policy. What they're talking about is the horse race. To throw that in there one more time, it's Biden against Trump. It's WWE. It's the news media 24/7. somehow, guys, we got to figure out how to make our videos go viral so more people can see them, because education is the key and getting the word out. So that's, and yes, of course, Joe Jorgensen, at least if you vote for Joe, right, you know, a year or two from now, you can say, I had nothing to do with this. I voted for Joe Jorgensen. So at least do that.
I agree. Yeah, guys, we'll be, everyone who's watching, we're trying to do this pretty regularly with the four of us. And we'll, as Dave alluded to, we're trying to stay out of the horse race. We're trying to talk about actual issues and what's going on. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.